Today we are dealing with more COVID cases than we're comfortable with.
Really? You have to send me that encyclical that you sent around to the school, by the way, Jim.
Oh,
project.
did I not do that? Which one was it?
I don't know. How many encyclicals have you sent around about COVID lately?
More than one.
So why don't you send us the most provocative one?
Okay.
That's
I think I know.
provocative to who?
Provocative? Oh, provocative to the most number. How's that? To the greatest number.
I'll send you the one on privilege because that garnered me the most hate mail.
Brave man. Well, put that under courage.
Stupidity, one of the two.
So the reason I titled today Despair with a question mark is because there are a lot of reasons to despair.
There always are.
I don't know. I think it's worse these days. You don't think it's worse?
I didn't say that. It's always
right. Okay. Moving right along.
Yeah, I'll stop.
So the idea was that even though there are many causes for despair, we might survive. Under certain circumstances, we might thrive even. And I wanted to test that premise. So I'm not sure it's true. That's a very eloquent sigh, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm sighing because I think there's every opportunity for us to learn from this and to come out better on the other side. But I fear that we will ignore those lessons and just continue to do the stupid things that we do. So I'm going to be the one who sticks with a little bit with despair here. I despair for the fact that there's, like I said, every opportunity for us to focus on things like healthcare problems. We are dealing with all sorts of strange jurisdictional issues between counties that I never knew existed, that illustrate some of the problems we have with.
Like what? Tell us what you mean.
Well, in Colorado, I think this is true in most places, counties have the jurisdiction for health issues. And so it's the county of, county of Boulder can have a different reaction to a COVID outbreak than the county of Broomfield or the county of Larimer County. We got a bunch of them around here. And we have 60,000 people who either go to school or work here, and they live in probably a dozen different counties. And so that's created some interesting problems with contact tracing, with the systems we've set up, I'll put it this way, pretend that people never leave a county. And we all know that's not true.
Right.
So does that mean there's no overriding statewide or national framework?
There is so the state has weighed in, and I think the state of Colorado has done a really good job of stepping in, where typically the federal folks would have stepped in, but they've done pretty much Zippo. But for example, Governor Paul, our governor, has mandated masks, and he's been sued for it. And people have, claimed that mask wearing is unconstitutional. Mask wearing, you can't mandate mask wearing. It's a whole bunch of things that they claim. And unfortunately, there's a nugget of truth in the fact that he's got to get local jurisdictions to actually enact punishments for not wearing masks. So
he can make it a requirement, but not to have it enforced is the problem. Exactly.
He can say you've got to wear a mask, but if there's no enforcement, and particularly if the local law enforcement won't enforce it, then it's kind of toothless. As an example, the county my daughter and her husband and 2 kids live in, up in Weld County, when Polis said you got to wear a mask, they openly defied it. There were several restaurants that said, nope, we're going to continue to do what we do. The only way that he was able to exert state control was the state does control restaurant licensing. So the state has shut down restaurants and has shut down bars that were not behaving themselves. But we weren't able to go directly to, you know, for example, there was a group of people who gathered up in Weld County for a concert back in May. And we needed local law enforcement to go in and say, this is an illegal gathering. And they wouldn't do that.
So we have a similar conflict with a restaurant that has had its license, they've been told to close statewide, but is even had a legislature there saying he's showed up without masks and they're supporting them. And so they're taking that through the courts, which is taking months.
Yeah.
And in the background, I've listened to a couple of legal, I'm not that bad, but I mean, I listened to a bunch of legal arguments.
Just sounds bad, Gene.
I know. Discussing the kind of framework for this, and it goes way back. Eventually, it seemed to me, it's clear that the arguments are going to be in the side of the governor and the higher administrative authorities for health reasons, not for other ones, but for health, that they will prevail. But of course, it may take a couple of years to clarify. And that's a problem.
And even with that, if you don't get local law enforcement to actually enforce a law, then it's kind of toothless.
Right.
You know, for example, we have Colorado passed a number of, I think, very sensible gun restriction laws. And we've got several counties that just refuse to, what's the word, to enforce them. Sheriffs just say, no, I'm not going to do that. So, and I don't know what kind of pushback you can give to those folks. I don't know.
So you said you wondered whether people can learn.
Yes. Yes. Is that possible?
What is your official title there at the university?
Annoyer in chief.
I think you're the dean, aren't you?
Yes, I'm a dean, yes.
So you're questioning whether people can learn. So here's my question.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever done a study on what percentage of people appear to be capable of learning and changing?
Yeah, I think we did that back in 2016.
You mean the election?
It was called an election, yeah.
Well, I guess we failed that test.
Well, no, actually, it was only about 30% or 33% or something like that. But
okay, so 33% of the population is incapable of learning.
Apparently.
You have to give a time span for that. You know, it's no, I'm serious.
Yeah,
it's within, you know, a day, a week, a year, 10 years, a century. And so one reason for saying that is that I've been, well, here it is. I've been working on this paper. You can read. It's 100 years of water quality in the Mississippi River, which I've gotten data for. And we've gone through the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, and that had some effect. But it wasn't a willing embrace to begin with.
Yeah.
And now, I found this other paper about how people, I'm trying to make it brief, how they view risk. And it basically went through the semantics of how people interpret risk. And it's shifted from one over 100 years now of war being the main risk to health being the main risk. And so it's not a step function, you know, where you go boom and down to another one and back up like we have sometimes in ecological systems. But in terms of the civilization, it takes a while. And so if you kind of, you know, take a long look at this. It's a constant struggle, but there can be changes, which is the case now. If we try to put lead and acid rain back in the air and lead in the water, there'd be a big fight about that. Some other things might change, but they do change, but it just doesn't happen right away, is my
So wait a
point.
minute, I have a question about this. Who was in the study? Was anybody from Somalia, for example, in the study?
In the semantic study?
The one
Right.
about risk.
About risk?
Yes.
It was in the English language, and it was probably primarily, I'd have to go back to it, primarily English-speaking literature, you know.
Okay, so my
But it was done by a Chinese.
so my hunch is that the study participants were not the people most likely to be impacted right now by war. And it seems to me there are an awful lot of people around the globe who would say that their greatest risk is war, even more than health.
I think it's true. It
Right,
does
right.
depend on the local conditions. Yeah.
But you recall that I'm going to push back a little bit. Was it Gabriel de Garcia? Oh,
Garcia Marquez.
Garcias, yes.
Yeah.
Marquez said when he accepted his Nobel Prize that Europeans needed to take the long view. And, you know, he was writing from the history of South America that was describing things that happened. I know it's somewhat as a novel, but they had, you know, evolved, you might say, over 300 years, skipping the disease-infested colonization period. But Europeans had done this over 2,000 years. You know, they had these really bloody wars where they killed hundreds of thousands in battles. And now we're doing that with the disease in the United States, at least. You know, it's all 200,000 right now. So I'm just saying there are ups and downs in all this, but there is some, you know, change that we need to look at the temporal aspect of this. And things do change. They unfortunately are not in a 4-year cycle yet, but
No.
I
was about to say, Gene, I would agree with that. If you look at the history of humans and human society, I think in general, there's been a progression towards a better society. So we've learned something. We've learned a little bit about equity. We've learned a little bit about the environment. We've learned a little bit about things. And so I think we're progressing in the right direction. As the eternal optimist, I'm always very happy to think about that.
And as the eternal pessimist between us all, I'm going to push back to that because, again, I'm going to say that most of these studies are taking place out of the Western world, or at least the advanced, what we might call the advanced world. And we still have a huge proportion of the human population who haven't learned a thing and are subject to the most horrendous circumstances. So I wonder about two things. First of all, Malthus' theory that the only way we do get our population down, because we're too stupid to do it any other way, is with war. And then Ian Dunlap, that I like to reference, that we've already reached a tipping point where what's going to create depopulation is completely out of our control. It's going to be sea level rise, it's going to be storms, it's going to be pandemics, and regional wars. So I was talking with my therapist about that this morning. I said, things look pretty bad. Are we supposed to just accommodate to a level of despair? That a whole bunch of what's going on right now is going to continue in our lifetime? That we will continue to be forced to bear witness to unnecessary misery on the part of millions, perhaps billions of people, because we have rampant fascists around the world?
I, I agree. I agree with your observations that it's pretty bad, but to you, I think the trick, not the trick, the being deimmobilized, to be neutered, so to speak, by the despair is giving up, you might say, and that I don't accept.
I never said that.
I know that, but it's that it hangs in the air like a smoky, you know, and you don't know that it's not like we accept it. We see that there's smoke in the air and we need to do something about it is what, and I think we can get immobilized by by with the despair can immobilize us. Sometimes we have to accept that, I suppose, but that doesn't mean we really accept it. We have aspirations beyond that.
What exactly are we accepting or not accepting? I'm willing to accept the idea that it's existential and any efforts that we make are Sisyphean. They are despite the hopelessness. It's in defiance of the hopelessness.
Yep.
But I'm not sure that it's even useful to minimize the despair and the hopelessness.
I'm not going to minimize it. I looked at 2 appointments today and it said, it was really kind of awful.
Like what?
Yes.
What's about
it? You know, there was Jim, you made this guy that used to be at LSU, moved to Delaware as a climate scientist. He was just appointed as the assistant secretary in NOAA for prediction and forecast. And he
doesn't sound good.
And he was, you know, he's worked for the Heartland Institute. He's a climate dynamic. And Jane Lutsenko, who used to head NOAA, you know, said, you know, we could put up with contrarians, but we have to have data. And the guy doesn't have data, you know?
Yeah.
And the other one was the guy in charge, basically the spokesperson for the Center for Disease Control, or right there. And he's a little wacky.
Yeah. I mean, last week.
Yeah.
So, you know,
and
he said he was.
Yeah.
So let's see, there's 33% of the population is incapable of learning right now, which is when we need them to learn. I'm not sure exactly what proportion of the human population is under imminent threat of war, but it's fairly great. Idiots and fascists are having their day again. And this is the part that's hard. How do we accept all that and just show up every day and do the best we can without sinking into deep depression? Deep depression doesn't stop me either, but it's just hard. Is there any way to make it any easier?
Any way to make it any easier? Well, I'll back up one question. So how do we do this? And the answer is the alternative is not nearly as attractive as getting up every day and trying. Because the alternative is indeed despair. And I find despair to be unproductive and exhausting, and certainly not a strategy that is going to benefit me at all. I would far rather tilt at windmills, knowing I'm going to lose, than sit back and go, I'm not even trying.
Well, the definition of despair is the complete loss or absence of hope.
Yeah.
Do you need hope in order to act?
If hope is a plan, it's helpful. If it's a palliative to keep you in place, no. I think it's an aspiration.
Yeah. I like the idea of, I mean, hope, it seems to me, needs to be accompanied by some, at least a modicum of reality. So if you know, for example, if you're looking at the cupboard and there's no food in there and you've lost your job, and you got, you know, $3 in your pocket, if you buy a lottery ticket, there's hope there, but it's really not productive hope. You know, there, you could use that $3 in a myriad of other ways to benefit your hope, I would say. So there's a
Or I think people take drugs because they feel no hope.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's there's a very good relationship there between people who feel as though there's really no way out of the situation I'm in right now, and the only way to get out of that situation is to go to an altered state.
Which is admittedly not so good.
No, but it's not an uncommon
Right.
strategy. Yeah.
So
And to think of addiction as strategy.
Well, for some people it is strategy. It's like, how do I get through the day knowing that this is, you know, I'm in the midst of a classic shit show, and there are ways to get through the day.
If you're going to get through it feeling bad, or are you going to feeling not so bad? I think that's how sometimes they think, because if you have a numbness, or you're numbing your hopelessness and your pain of whatever kind, you know, I think that that's what happens sometimes.
Absolutely.
So I want to go back to Gene's point about time, because I think you're right. If you look at the trajectory of civilization, there is at least a measure of hope that we improve in some way, although it could be contested. But let's assume that that's correct, that we progress in some sense beyond just developing technologies. So what I've been saying for a few years is, well, I think whatever I'm producing is going to be possibly for whatever refugia are left after this shitstorm.
Yep.
So here's a scientific question for you scientists. If we have the worst case scenario, if Dunlap is correct, and we're going to reduce our population from 30 billion to 2 billion sometime in the next decade, and God help us if Trump unleashes nuclear weapons and all the rest of his wonderful plans for the future, how long would it take for humanity to recover, presuming that there would be pockets of civilization left someplace on the globe?
Well, history would tell us that it takes time, because we've kind of done this multiple times, and it can be, you know, I think in some cases recovery was relatively fast, but in other cases recovery was a century in coming. So, you know, partly that's you know, industrialized versus non-industrialized societies. I think industrialized societies can react much faster, but you know, the wild card is the stupidity factor. Even if you have all the tools in the tool shed, are you capable of using them wisely? It's a question, I think.
So when you and your colleagues do modeling, do you adjust for the stupidity factor?
You can. I think I might even have made a model with stupidity factor as a factor in it.
It was labeled that way?
It could have been, yeah. They were typically pretty straightforward on these things. I'm pretty sure in the coding it was SF, by the way, but you know. Because we've had extensive wars and then come out of that. We've had extensive plagues and come out of it. we've had inadvertent genocide. We've had purposeful genocide and come out of it.
Not every time.
No, we've been successful sometimes, yeah. And by the way, as an editorial comment, the loss of species is, to me, one of the biggest crimes that we're committing these days, because that's permanent.
Yeah, and we're not going to come out of that one.
No, you lose the great auk, you've lost the great auk. There's no getting around that. No matter what Steven Spielberg says. But I don't know, I was rambling.
No, you're not rambling. The only question I have is, what about the comparative scale? It's all very well to come out of the 10th, 12th, or 13th century in Europe after those plagues and begin to rebuild a population. But that was small potatoes, I think, compared to the cluster and the cascades and the scale of what we're facing right now. For example, if sea level rise continues, how much land is going to be left for anybody?
Well, it's a fair amount. I mean, but I'll give you an example of a rapid recovery. And I actually think that rapid recoveries are problematic because it probably means there was no lesson learned. We globally came out of the 1918 flu. And in the US, we came out with just turning our back on the reality of it. I forgot, 600, almost 700,000 people died, and off we went. Now, I don't think we learned crap from that. The Europeans, a lot of their healthcare systems that exist today were developed after the 1918 flu, after World War I, because and those healthcare systems are quite good. And so there was lesson learned there, and they came out of it. And it took them probably, I don't know, 5 years or so to come out of that, but they did. So I think that there's, it's possibilities to, depending on the disaster that you're facing, to recover fairly quickly. But again, the question is, did you learn something from that? The fact that US had, over 500,000 people die at a time when we didn't have that many, we maybe had 1 billion people on the planet, period. That's a, obviously, not obviously, but many people didn't even know that there was a 1918 flu. And by, a generation later, a lot of it just simply been forgotten. Historians, of course, were all over it, and epidemiologists were all over it. But the general public, if you ask them back in 2019 or 2018, what was the flu of 1918 like, they would look at you like, well, I don't know. Did they have flu shots?
So let's go back to this teachability thing, because I think that's probably one of the keys. I've been finishing up this work memoir, and my sister, who's not a stupid person, asked to look at it. So I sent her the draft manuscript, and she said, it's a work memoir. That means ideas. She said, well, I skipped over all the science to get to the story. And I thought, I worked really, really, really hard to make that science interesting and fun and compelling. And to this smart person, it was just a distraction. I find that a little bit mind-boggling, because she's probably the average reader that apparently doesn't get it, doesn't want to get it, and doesn't see the relevance of getting it. So are they just, even the supposedly smart ones, are they all part of that 33% of stupid?
No. I think it's a question of you know, is your message intended to reach out to the vast majority of people out there? Or is your message intended for a different audience, maybe 10, 20% of people who are, you think, sharp enough, discerning enough to be able to absorb the message?
It's the audience graph, you know, we're so much, the audiences are so much more diverse these days, I would say, that it's not, you have to, not the writer, but I mean, you can't expect the audience reading it. I mean, if somebody gave me a geology article on, or something on outer space, I'm going to skip it, large parts of it. It's just too much for me to get all through the lingo. That's as an extreme example. So, I mean, you can't, it's very hard, especially for an artist, I would say, to write in a language that appeals to everybody. It appeals to 50%, it appeals to 10%. I think it's
Yeah, I think that's fair too, Aviva.
The field is so much more diverse. Who reads? And I mean, that was one reason why you know, the Gutenberg Bible was so popular, because it was rewritten in a way that people had no longer a way to read outside of Latin. Just a few people could, but all of a sudden it was exposed to everybody. Well, now we can't do that. I mean, there's lots of versions of Bibles out there, and there's lots of different varieties of Christianity in Bibles, and it just people are in a very narrow field when they read something. It's very hard to appeal to a large number of people.
So let me pose this differently. Should we reconsider what we think of as smart or teachable?
Why would we do that?
Because evidently there are a lot of us that are still stupid and unteachable. So, and that apparently it has absolutely nothing to do with education, intelligence, or class. So that implies to me that we're doing it wrong. We're connecting the wrong way with the wrong people when we try to teach things that would allow this species to survive and thrive.
It's definitely a problem.
You know, maybe let me say that in a different way. There's, I think that, I don't know what percentage it is, but there's certainly not 100% of people are able to think critically and to analyze critically. And that's a problem that is very much in focus today, where people will seek out news outlets that reinforce their already held beliefs, which is not critically thinking. And I don't know what percentage of Americans do that, but it's not a small percentage. And but if you really want to educate yourself, if you're really interested in learning about some news topic, you got to go to multiple sources. You got to go to sources that might make you a little uncomfortable. But that's really the only way to get all sides of the story. I don't know what percentage of Americans do that, but I fear it's not a very large percentage. But that's really what you need to do. And you know, I think we talked about this once before, but one of the great problems we have with the media today in the US is that it's so polarized, and they've just got audiences. You know, you only read those newspapers and those magazines that share your either political ideology or sociological ideology. That's the MO for many people.
Yeah, but in defense of doing that, I'm not going to read some things because it's a waste of time. And,
well, true.
And I only have so much time, and if they don't have a way of presenting something so that I can evaluate it as opposed to yelling at me through written word, you know, why should I spend any time there? I mean, I
Well,
could try to figure it out, but I'm not going to ordinarily go there at all.
yeah.
You know, I don't
I
turn
would
on
say that,
much TV for that reason.
yeah. But I would say that there's some television stations, there's some radio, and there's still a fair number of print outlets that I trust to give me both sides
Yeah.
of something. You know, I trust the New York Times. I trust, you know, the LA Times. There are other newspapers I trust that, even though somebody might say that's left-leaning or something like that, in reality, it's more, you know, this is a pretty fairly balanced outlet for giving me facts and for not trying to preach at me one side or the other. On the other hand, there are some obvious television outlets that really are just, you know, echo chambers, as they say. They're just, you know, I'm gonna tell you what I think you need to know, and then off we go.
So
Or
here's the thing.
softball.
Sorry, what were you going to say, Gene?
I'm just saying softball
Yeah.
interviews, you know,
Yeah.
they're meaningless.
No, they are totally meaningless, and they you know, they willfully ignore anything that doesn't fit the narrative, and that's a problem.
So we have to close down, to your delight, Jim, imminently.
Oh,
But I have one parting question. This also came out of my conversation with my sister, and who has a bachelor's, and I said something about how one verifies information in the process of writing a dissertation. And her response was, "Oh, that's just somebody's opinion." And I said something like, the process of verifying information is not the process of creating an opinion. It's different. But it seems like most people these days have no idea what the difference might be between an opinion and critical thinking that comes to a conclusion. And that's like a staggering idea to me, because that's a real problem.
I agree, it's a real problem, and it's the fact that it's that education doesn't seem to cure that problem is something that's as an educator bothers me. I mean, I know some people who are graduates of actually the University of Colorado, friends of mine who are, you know, just as susceptible to thinking that opinion is fact. And I don't quite know how to get out of that problem.
Gene, do you have any thoughts for that as we part?
I wanted to say one other thing, but I remember the quote from a while ago about you're entitled to your opinion, but not your facts.
Yeah.
I mean, but on the other hand, scientists can be subjectively involved with their research, if you think about facts being science facts. So we get tripped up on that all the time, of course. We can't see an alternative. We don't read as if there's an alternative. And so we avoid it, you know.
Yeah.
I want to say something about the beginning, which is that the depression, somebody else has told me this, so we went over this. Depression in itself has sometimes something to be avoided, but in a very real way, it's not to be avoided, in the sense that it has some intelligence behind it. There's something you're resisting for a reason, and there's those reasons. What you're resisting that you get depressed about is not accepting the fact that it's this way, but also that you have an alternative view. If you are accepting the alternative and saying, okay, I believe that, or whatever, you know, or I'm going to avoid it, that's different from saying, oh, I want it to be something else. You have some alternative universe in your mind that you think is, in this most cases, it's fair, it's more beneficial, or, you know, in some way, and it's usually at a very fundamental level of human existence. And so for that reason, I think depression should not be put off to the side and not examined. I think it needs to be looked at as a healthy sign of your basic intelligence coming out somehow. And maybe it's leaking out. It's not coming out full force, but it is there. So.
Well, as a matter of fact, I believe there was a study some time ago to the effect that there is a correlation between intelligence and depression. The more intelligent you are, the more depressed you are. And on that note, that cheery note, as usual, we're going to let Jim escape early.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. It's not about Jim today.
Yeah, it was my fault. I said we were going to quit early, but I knew that it would delight Jim.
Well, I get to go to the bathroom. That's my daily, oh boy, I get an oh boy moment. Yeehaw moment, as we say out west.
On that note, we shall reconvene next time.
All right, hang in there.
It's very nice to see you too.
Thanks.
Yeah, hang in there. Hang in there, my friends.
Yes.
Bye-bye. We'll see you, Daisy.
Hi, Daisy.